Hi, Saba.
Hi, Layla.
Thank you for accepting the invitation to this podcast, talking about your path, which is very inspirational, and I'm sure it's going to help so many women out there. So, can you present yourself?
Yeah, I'll do a little introduction. So my name is Saba Asafa. I live in the United States. I grew up in the United States. I'm from origin. My dad is from Ethiopia and my mom is Black American. And I grew up in specifically Ohio. And I always wanted to be a geologist, which is really interesting for what we'll talk more about later in the conversation. But always was very interested in nature. Still am interested in nature. Love to be outside. Also, always interested in music, and so I still do some creative things in that way. I'm in a choir, a local choir. I sing still, and then I just play instruments here and there on my own. But other than that, yeah, I just enjoy spending time with loved ones and learning. I feel like I'm a lifelong learner, so that's something else that I really enjoy. I love to read.
Yeah, true. I mean, I know you and I see how passionate you are about music and about many things. You're such a good in sync, by the way.
Oh,
Has
thank you.
voice sync. Huh?
Thank you.
So if we think about like the path from the beginning, so you were in high school, let's take it from there.
Mhm.
And how did you make your choices when you were in high school?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I feel like I've always had a curiosity with kind of nature and all kinds of parts of nature. So, biology, chemistry, the stones that are out there, just everything, right? And in high school, I was able to, my counselor basically told me about a program that was outside of my high school that basically was geared towards kids that, or young adults, I guess, right, that um, were interested in science, interested in the sciences, and kind of exploring career paths. And so I was able to do that. I did it, I think, 2 different summers. It was a summer program. And every week we got on a bus and we went to a local, company that was based in the sciences. So some of them were like biotech, some of them were chemistry related industries, just going and talking to the people that were in these industries. And it really helped me hone in like what was interesting to me and what wasn't, and what parts of different industries was interesting. So that was one thing, right? But then also in high school, kind of similar but different was another program that I was able to sign up for my junior year, and that was also geared towards young adults that were interested in science, but it was more towards engineering specifically, and it was with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so it's just the university in Boston in the US. And we all got to just learn from the engineers that kind of went to school there, and they came back to help out with this program. And that was another way for me to kind of explore another path. And I learned that I didn't want to be an engineer. So that was helpful. And yeah, again, just kind of honing in on, where I might want to go. And that moment with all these kind of options, I started to hone in on either geology or a car designer. So it was really interesting to like, those are, not necessarily similar. But I knew that those were some of my interests, was also like design. I liked to draw as well at that time. And I also liked cars. And so I thought, maybe it's one of these two things. Let me, again, like keep exploring. And there was no programs that I knew of at the time that really went into car design around me. So I kind of had to just pick up books at the library and just look at, what do car designers do? What does that seem like is happening, on a day to day? But at the same time, I also thought, okay, maybe I'll be a car designer in Italy because I like Italian cars. And so I took Italian classes from, freshman year of high school all the way through. Actually, it became my minor in college, um, because I actually liked learning language and I thought that language was a beautiful language. And so it's funny, I didn't end up pursuing car design at all, like not even in college or anything like that. But it's funny that interest led me to enjoying learning a language and about a culture too. And so, anyway, I decided more on geology, and it was really just digging into it more, learning as much as possible again with books. I didn't know any geologists either, so I didn't really have a person or anyone to talk to about it. I wish I did, honestly, but I didn't. So all of that decision making in high school was mainly for geology specifically was just me thinking, it's a cool career and might be interesting to get into. So that's what I pursued in college was geology.
Why geology, Saba?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I think this is kind of normal for a lot of kids, but I played in the dirt, and would dig for rocks and would just like love each rock, which is very interesting. I remember that. Like I loved each rock and I would take care of it and like take it to like I would clean it outside and be very just like caring with that rock and then bring it inside into my rock collection and like I would know each rock. And we would also go to the mall when I was a kid, and I remember going to like those gem shops that are around, and I would every time want to go to the gem shop. And not every time my mom would say yes, but sometimes she would. And sometimes she would say yes to me, purchasing a rock as well. And I would, each one would just love to learn about it. Like, I don't know, I just really love to learn about all the rocks. And I would, in library, I would get books and I would read and look at all the rock pictures and say, oh, yeah, that looks like this and that looks like that. And then at the very end of one of the books, there was this is what a geologist looks like and this is like the tools that they use. And I was like, oh, this is a career. So it started as like totally an interest and a love, and then I saw that it could actually be a career, and I really just held on to that up through,
Wow.
high
And is
school.
it because it's something from your region? I mean, are you surrounded by mountains, by rocks, and
Mhm.
that led you to this kind of passion, or is it
Mhm.
just somehow like randomly it came to you?
Yeah, you know what's interesting, and I think it's a really good question, is that my mom's side of my family was coal miners
Wow.
for some generations. So they were always digging in the rocks of the mountains of West Virginia, which is right next to Ohio. So they were in West Virginia for a few generations, digging in the mountains for resources. And it's really interesting because there was also death with that, right? It's a dangerous job to be in a mountain, and there were a couple generations of those workers that died young in my family. And so it's interesting to think about that, like, what's being passed on and my own journey with that. Yeah,
Was it conscious?
no, it wasn't conscious because I was so young and I didn't know
Wow.
about a lot of my family stuff, at such a young age. And so I honestly didn't make that connection till much later. I knew, I think by high school, I knew more about that part of my family's history, but I still really didn't make that connection till like probably, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Like more recently, I made that connection where I was like, oh, okay, I just had such a love for the rocks, but it must come from somewhere, and that seems to be where it comes from.
So it came from your DNA, from
Mhm.
your ancestor.
Mhm.
That's deep. Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
So having this passion, not connected to your history at that time yet, what was the next step?
Yeah, so in high school, I started to think about okay, if I'm going to go into geology, now I need to think about what colleges, have that program. First of all, not every college has a geology program. And then where do I want to go? Um, I knew, or I was at least curious to go somewhere different. And that's just, I think for me, I like to explore. And so I just didn't want to stay in the same place my whole life. And so I knew I was probably going to go to college somewhere outside of Ohio, where I grew up. And so, yeah, I just did my research, honestly, just on the internet, and was saying, how much does it cost? And are there scholarships I can find? And, all of those things, just to make sure I would go to a place that made sense for what I wanted. And so I ended up going to Vanderbilt, which is in Nashville, Tennessee. So it's about a 6 hour drive south of Ohio, like almost straight south of Ohio. Um, didn't know anyone. There was really no connection besides all the things I was saying about like the right school. It felt like the right school for the choice I was making. And I studied geology there. I enjoyed the program. I was able to, like, I think freshman year, actually, I saw in the department, I saw a sign that said, "Do you want to go to Iceland?" And again, I'm an explorer. And I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, that sounds cool. I've never thought about Iceland before. And it said, yeah, it said, "Do you want to go to Iceland?" And then below that, it said, help this professor and the PhD students that work with this professor on their project. Like, they need help. They need extra hands basically to collect rocks in Iceland and bring them back and then study them in the lab. And so and that's exactly what I was expecting of geology. Like, part of my interest in geology, besides the love of rocks, was the exploration that it could entail. Like, you can go anywhere in the world because there's, the where Earth is made of rock, right? So anywhere you go, there's rocks, and there's something interesting. There's a story with every rock, right? So you can go anywhere and study geology. And so I was really glad I was able to have that opportunity. I, basically met with that professor, just to talk about more about the opportunity. And he had a couple questions for me of like my availability and my interests, whatever. And it worked out. I met with the two PhD students that were working with him. And that next summer, we went to Iceland. And it was amazing. I really loved it. Got to explore a different culture. It was the summertime, so it wasn't so cold. It was still cold, and we were camping, so it was kind of intense,
How
but
long did you stay? How long?
it was a week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I connect the dots because you told me once that you went to Iceland.
Hmm.
Wow, that was
Yeah.
the goal. Nice.
Through geology. Yeah. So, and it was nice because it was a paid opportunity, right? So it was just a really nice opportunity to learn more, go somewhere new, and learn about the craft of geology too. And um, it was really fun, just overall really fun to go. And also, even when we came back to the lab, my I started to be a lab assistant. So from that point on, I was a lab assistant for that lab the rest of my college career. Even in the summers, I would stay in the summertime, during summer break, and I was a lab assistant there that whole time. The only other job I had at the same time, I worked two jobs basically, was that, and then I helped at the library. And so that was really nice to be in the lab too, because that was another part of research that I loved, was just there's so much focus, attention to detail. This has to go first, and this has to go second, then this has to go next. And I was basically going through these steps with each rock sample, and basically, crushing the rocks and making it into the minerals, cleaning the minerals, getting the minerals to sort so that we could only focus on one specific mineral, to then be able to look under the microscope and be able to then basically, we're dating the rocks based off of that mineral. and then also creating like rock samples to go under another more powerful microscope to then see what the other characteristics of the rock were, what's the chemical makeup, things of that nature. So just like, I don't know, I love digging really, really deep into something, and that was just really satisfying to just dig super, super deep into what's happening with these rocks. And the whole point was to then say, why are these rocks here? Because they were kind of an anomaly in the spot of Iceland that they were, compared to what we thought as geologists was happening with the volcanics of that area. So it was just a really interesting project, and I just loved to dig deep into it. And that was the geology that I loved. And I can talk about what the turning point was, so like why I fell out of it. But that's the kind of geology I loved, and I still, I mean, as a hobbyist, I still love to like at least go out and explore and think about why rocks are the way they are, and I'll still collect rocks. I don't go as deep as, I don't have a lab, right? So I can't do all of that, but I still love to think about the story behind rocks.
Nice.
Mhm.
Wow. And I can see your personality out there,
Yeah.
like digging until like details. This is how
Yeah.
you are also like in
Yeah.
life and in other projects.
Hmm.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that was a nice experience you had for a week, and then you went to the lab. And from there, you still wanted to follow, to pursue in that path.
Hmm.
What was the next step?
Yeah. So pretty much the rest of my college career was working with those rocks. Those PhD students did go back a second time. I didn't go that time. So they just basically brought back more rocks for me to process in the lab. And they processed things in the lab too. So it wasn't just me, it was kind of a team effort. And then I was able to have my own thesis. So usually, at least in kind of the American school system, you would have like a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, but not necessarily undergraduate, which is where I was at the time, thesis. So it was cool. It was like a interesting program that the geology department was doing. That was, if you've been working in the lab and like working with a professor already, you could sign up. You'd have to really audition basically and say like what your thesis would be and see if it made sense. Um, and then you would be able to write your own thesis and then present it at the end when you were graduating as a senior. So I was able to basically write a thesis on all of that, what I was just mentioning about the Icelandic rocks. And then I was able to also present a poster at a couple of conventions that were like geology, national, geology conventions. And, those were great experiences as well, just being able to talk about what I was learning. And then from there, so that was all of undergrad, right? So was very much focused on geology. I mentioned I minored in Italian, so I also was able to take a lot of Italian classes. That was very enjoyable. It was a nice balance too. It felt like it was different parts of my brain were being able to, be used at different times. I got involved in, different other things as well, like, extracurriculars, dancing. I mentioned before, music has still stayed throughout my life too. And so dancing was in a choir as well. And then that was all of undergrad. And then I knew as a geologist, usually you still have to do higher education. And so I could do a master's, I could do a master's into a PhD, I could do just straight into a PhD. There was some options, and each option kind of had different reasonings to do any of them. And so I honestly wasn't sure if I wanted to be in school for a very long time, which a PhD is, I think the average right now is 6 years that it takes someone to finish a PhD. And so I just was weighing that. That was a decision that I really weighed heavily about and thought really hard about, because I knew that that's a really good degree to have, especially in a science, like any of the sciences. A lot of times they want you to have a PhD. But I said, let me at least start with a master's and just see. And I can always use those 2 years of a master's as a part of a PhD program, just basically extend it so that it would just be maybe another 3 or 4 years, and then I would have a PhD if I so chose to do that. So I went for a master's, and that's what brought me to Bellingham, Washington. Went to Western Washington University for master's in geology, and it was a different it was a different type of geology. So before I was studying a lot of like volcanic and like chemistry, like the chemical makeup of volcanic rocks was basically the thing I was studying. And this program, or at least the person that I was working with, the professor I was working with, specialized in electromagnetic geology. So very much about the Earth's magnetic field. And so it was very different. It was a very different type of geology, which that just shows you how vast, right? The study of geology can be. Like there's so many different parts that you can think about with the earth and with rocks. So anyway, that was what I was studying when I was in Bellingham, was the Earth's electromagnetic field. But specifically, the project I was working on was how might that inform um, certain particles that collect on leaves surfaces. And that would basically inform the air pollution in a certain area if the electromagnetometer could pick up certain dust particles that had like heavy metals basically, then you could tell that there was a lot more heavy metals in an area if you like collected the leaves in that area, and saw that. So my whole project was basically collecting leaves, and I did it in Seattle just to be in like a bigger city that might have more pollutants, and went around Seattle and collected leaves and then put them into the electromagnetic reader, and then put up a map basically. So I knew the location of where I found each leaf, and I know the reading of each leaf, and so now I can map the reading by where I found the leaf, and I can say this area has more heavy metals, pollutants than this area, and see what that map says. And it was interesting because, yeah, what you might think was bus routes had more and near the train yard had more, right? So you might think that those places would have more heavy metal particulates. So yeah, it was really interesting. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was different. I think I would, if I had to say like which one I enjoyed more, I did enjoy the rocks, like right, like as I liked the rocks, and I was doing a lot of leaf work with this one. But it was also interesting just to kind of learn, right? Again, lifelong learner, so it was just something else interesting to learn about. And so yeah, that was the next step, was grad school, and it took me about 2 years. Wrote my thesis for that as well. Presented it, and that's kind of in a master's program, present your thesis, and that's how you graduate. So I was able to do that, and honestly, I didn't know what I was going to do next. So I, like, towards the end of my graduate program, I knew I was going to move again. I knew that much. And that was just, I didn't think I was going to stay in Bellingham. It's kind of a smaller, as you know, actually, but it's, smaller city, and just wasn't exactly my vibe. So all I knew was I was going to go somewhere else. But I just applied to a lot of different things, and I ended up being a part of this program that basically was bringing scientists into national parks. And so I was brought into Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And it's interesting. I think it's funny, like talking through all my path, because I just feel like a lot of it was, I don't know, like this thing, I don't know what's next, but I'm going to do this next thing that's going to lead me to the next thing. And so I honestly didn't know what to expect from being in such a small town of Estes Park, Colorado, and in the woods for the majority of the time. And this was a 3-month program. And so I truly was just in the woods. My cabin was there. We had like a shared, kind of spot that everyone, it was like where the offices were and the kitchen and dining table and like a lounging area, but and that was like a shared space between, I think there was 6 of us at the time, but it could accommodate like up to 10 people in these cabins, single cabins next to each other. And so other than us though, like it was a long road, a long mountain road to go to the town of Estes, which was the closest town, and then to get to Denver, I think it was another, which is like a bigger city. It took another like hour and a half. So I was really kind of out in the middle of nowhere to an extent. And my whole purpose there as like a scientist in the park, and like my specific role was to actually learn about the other scientists in the park. So I got to kind of talk to a biologist who was studying the microorganisms that might be in the water sources, because a lot of people hike there, and people are probably going to use the water that's on the trail next to them. How safe is that? Are there a lot of bacteria in those waters? Let's test and see if this is safe for park goers walking around. Different scientists that were trying to help with there was a bark beetle that had infested a lot of the trees there, and they were trying to mitigate the trees that were affected. So yeah, just a lot of different scientists, and my whole role was to interview them and then write about it in the like park newsletter. And then I also had my own side project as a scientist as well, and that was really just to create a path, it was kind of an app or a survey, maybe a questionnaire, you might call it, where if anyone was going around this certain path around this lake called Lily Lake, they could go on into their phone, or we even had like iPads they could use and answer questions about the plants and the animals around. And that was just to gauge like it was about climate change. So it was basically like, we know the normal seasonal changes. Let's say it's a pine tree that we're talking about. We know that the pine cones are this big, usually at this time of year. Usually they're, this big at this, bigger at this time of year, or they're not there, right? But then we have people reporting what it is in the moment, and we can compare to what we know, and are things shifting in time because of climate change. So that I loved doing that. I mean, I loved a lot of it, but I loved doing that because I loved that lake. Like there was something about that Lily Lake for me that I just loved going back to it. And then it was just also interesting to think about people's experiences and trying to make sure that their experience is good at the park, right? Like that was a part of what I was doing. And that was, we'll talk about this probably a little bit more, but that was the first time I could say that I felt like I could do something like that, right? Like that job wasn't very much the same as being a geologist, where I'm necessarily, right, there's some overlap, but there isn't that same, like I'm focused on a specific project about rocks, and then I'm gonna like report the data of these rocks to you about why these rocks are this way. So there was a little bit a difference, and I thought it was interesting that I enjoyed something different at that point. Yeah. And then so yeah, that was
Wow,
3 months.
nice. So
Yeah.
we can feel the bridge there.
Yes.
Tiny bridge.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this project was nice, it was new, it was different.
Hmm.
You were still in contact with nature, but not a geologist, a pure geologist, let's say.
Yep.
So from there, how long did you stay in this job or this program?
Yeah, it was only 3 months. So they were only doing like seasonal work. And a lot of national parks only do seasonal work, which is 3-month contracts. And I knew, because I really liked it, and I was like, oh, maybe I can just work in national parks. There's plenty of them across the US that I could, get into. But I also wanted a little bit more stability. I had been moving so much to different places, for school, and 3 months is really short to like have to keep finding something new. I was talking to some people that had been doing that worked there, that were like, yeah, I just do it every time. I just, get a new contract, and it just was sounding like a lot of work. So honestly, I was like, I just got to figure out something different. But now I was open to something that was more maybe in the environmental sciences, I would say, than in geology. And so that's actually what led me to the next job, because I just at that point I just applied to so many different places, and my my hope was that I could at least stay in the next job for some years, and really start to settle and into a place and figure more things out about life. So when I applied to a lot of different jobs, I was open to them not being pure geology, and so I did end up at in Phoenix, Arizona, and I it was my job title was water resource specialist, and so I worked for the Department of Water Resources in Arizona. And for people that aren't familiar with Arizona, it's a desert, so water is very important, and just knowing that the people that live there have water, and will have water for generations, is really important to the government of Arizona. And so that's where I worked. And again, it wasn't pure geology, but I was, when I first started, very much a field worker. So I went out in the field often and could look at the, very beautiful rocks of Arizona. If you've been to a desert, you might imagine kind of there's a lot of golds, reds, oranges, just beautiful colors in all the rocks, and open blue skies a lot of times. And so I really enjoyed being out there, especially in the very beginning. It was just new. It was different than what I was used to, as far as landscapes go. And yeah, so I would go out there, but instead of it being about going out in the field to get rocks, I was going out in the field to see water sources. So it was very similar, and I, went out with a partner that worked there as well, and we would just go on these trips, and we would go a lot of times to kind of the middle of nowhere of Arizona and see, they call them stock ponds, but it's really just when usually a rancher or a farmer purposely digs out the ground to then, whenever there's rain, it collects. And we had to know, the Department of Water Resources needed to know how much water was in all of these stock ponds across the state of Arizona. So that was my first project there. And, I enjoyed it. I would say that a lot of the kind of less populated areas of Arizona were a little bit treacherous, to be honest, where there's just like not great roads, like truly not good roads. And you could easily not see people for miles. Like you could be standing somewhere and not see a single person or a single like residence. And it was a little bit eerie for me. And that's when I started to think like maybe I don't want to always be out in the field, or maybe I need to only be out in the field in like certain places, because it just started to be a little bit scary. And there was a couple of times where a flat tire happened in the middle of the wood. Like there was a wooded area that had a lot of trees, and then a lot of like boulders that we hit one, and there was a flat tire. So just different things were made me kind of want to not be in the field anymore. And so that's actually when I stayed within the Department of Water Resources, but I just transitioned to another job. And it was more about making sure people that used water in the state reported how much water they used every year. So it was a very interesting like trajectory to go from what I thought I would want to do, which is like I really enjoyed field work before, to then be pretty much at my desk. Like it was very much a desk job. And, sometimes I would interact with the people that were reporting their use. So that was a little bit more interesting, but generally I was at my desk. And what was interesting about that time though was I actually was able to be brought on to a project where, since the 80s. That's like when people started to have to report their water use in Arizona. It had always been paper reports brought into the state. We had to, like, all the people on my team basically had to scramble every year to like get all of those reports, get them into the system, and then do all the calculations and put out the report. And in that moment, the department wanted to fund basically the digitization of those reports so that people could go online and report them. And then we could just take that data easily. It would go straight to our system. And then we could do all the, calculations in an Excel worksheet that we need for then the report, the yearly report. And again, this is a bridge, I think, because now I'm almost like the project manager. There was three of us that were basically working together as project managers for the building of this website. And that's like what I do a lot more now, right? And it was interesting to go through that process. And we did, test the website and try to make sure people understood it, that they could walk through it, that they could report what they needed to report. If people had issues, we were the people they talked to. And like, I got to talk to people that had questions about the website, and then I could talk to the developers who I had been working with as they were putting the website together and say, hey, people aren't able to do this or that. I was reporting to the developers the issues people were having. They could fix it. And then like we just kept doing that and trying to perfect it more and more as much as possible. We even got a software that we could basically see where someone's mouse had gone, and we could see like, oh, this person like really had a hard time and clicked like everywhere, and they just like did not know where the way to find this specific thing, right? And so it was just very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. And of course, that really does lead up to where I am, close to where I am now, which this is right before I started to go into my transition into being a user experience researcher. So that was around 2019, 2020, right? And as you might think when you hear the year 2020, right? There's a lot that happened. And right, so COVID, and we had a lot of lockdowns, and there was a lot of turmoil within our department with that because we had to come in to do certain things. Like, as you might expect with government work, there's some like security concerns about doing everything online. And so they wanted us to come in. And a lot of us felt like, you don't care about our needs and our safety, going, into the office when it just, it was March of 2020, right? So we didn't have vaccines, and people are just concerned about getting sick and dying. All of that was happening, as you might recall, right? And so there was just a little bit of turmoil there. And then on top of that, in May, right? I think towards the end of May of 2020, George Floyd was killed and murdered by a police officer, Derek Chauvin, right? And it was just a time where, for me, and I think for a lot of people, time stood still because we were in a lockdown. We aren't doing the normal things we would do day to day that might distract us or that might take up a lot of our time and our mental energy. And a tragedy just happened, and now we have actually the time and space to say and see and express that this was a tragedy and like really process that. And to me, that was what the difference was in that moment than other times that a Black man was killed by police officers, right? Like, that has happened and still happens, but there was this moment where time was standing a little bit stiller. There was more space for people to reflect, and this happened, and it was filmed as well, like it was easily seen. And so all of that was happening. It felt very tumultuous for me, and I it just felt like that was the breaking point. It was where I had to make a different choice in my life. And it felt like I needed to figure out what actually is my purpose, and specifically with a job, what is going to fulfill me day to day. Like I was starting to just not enjoy what I was doing anymore. And also, I also didn't really like how my HR and like a lot of the departments just brushed everything with George Floyd under the rug. And I was just like, I don't want to work here. You know, it was just a lot of things that were kind of building up. And so I just was like, I have to do something different. And like we mentioned, there were some of these like sparks of things that were interesting that were outside of geology, um, that I was starting to kind of understand that maybe I am interested in how people are interacting with their technology, and maybe I am interested in just like how, yeah, how people are interacting with it. And but I didn't know. Still to this that point, I had never heard anything about user experience research, never heard a word about that, or about user experience field in general. But I started to basically go inward.
I remember you were in a specific program for artificial intelligence. Was it at that time
No.
that you were just like digging, understanding, learning? Maybe I'm going
Yeah.
too fast.
Yeah, no, I can get into that. Yeah,
Okay.
because that there was some of that at some point, but
Yeah. All
um
right.
basically I didn't know where I was gonna go, honestly, at that moment. But what happened was I did turn inward and I was like, what do I like to do? And I honestly can't tell you. I don't remember where I found this YouTube video, like why I came across this YouTube video, but it was this guy and he was saying, and his name's Chris Doe, I think. I think he does a lot of YouTube things and all of that kind of stuff. But he basically showed me ikigai, which is a Japanese, concept that basically you think about what do you like to do, what are you good at, what would help the world, and what could, get you paid, basically, how could, all of that. And I did it. He like did a whole exercise where in the YouTube video, he like walks you through that exercise. And I did it. I wrote it all down. And I realized a lot of things where I was like, oh, I like research, as we've, concluded from a lot of what I explained before. I want more creativity. That was something I felt like I wasn't getting in my previous role, where it was a lot of just like, this is what we're doing next. Okay, I'll do it. Like there wasn't any creativity of what for me to say, like, oh, maybe I'll try this or try that. I couldn't explore. That was a part of what I like to do, right? And those were the big key things for me that I got out of it, was like, I want to still do something that's research focused. I want to be able to explore, be creative, and maybe something that also involves talking to people a little bit more, like being more interactive with people, because geology, it's not that very much, right? And so those were kind of the key things that I thought about. And then I just started searching online. I really just put in those keywords and was just like, these keywords plus job, and user experience came up. And I started reading about it, and I was just like, wow, like just everything was cool about it to me. And I just never knew that it was a thing. And so I just started, learning about it. And what's funny is, because I worked on that project where I talked to developers at work, I became friends with one of them, and he had heard about it. Because I was just like talking to him about it one time, and he had heard about it already. And so he gave me a little bit of resources that was just like, yeah, maybe look at this blog, and, just little things, little resources for me to look into even more. And that's how I started to kind of learn about what that path might look like. And I also knew I wanted to quit my job. So I basically said, okay, I think I can make this career transition in a year. I'm going to give myself a year. And I need to make sure I have the budget and I have pretty much the discipline to stick to a budget for a year. And I thankfully did have the savings. And I mean, it was tight. I won't say it was, an amazing amount per se, but it was enough that I felt like I could, tightly follow a budget month to month to be able to not be working potentially for a year to be able to learn and grow and like do all the things I needed to do to get a job within a year. And so I just, put in my 2 weeks notice at work. Uh, I think actually no, right before I put in my 2 weeks notice, I did still more research. I just wanted to be very sure. And so I found a that you basically could do boot camps, which, is just short time of learning a new concept, a new field. And there's different types of boot camps, but there were user experience boot camps. And so I started looking into them. I signed up for one and I started to, look at the different, what does the curriculum look like? And what was funny was that a lot of the curriculum of this boot camp was YouTube videos. And I said, I'm not going to pay thousands of dollars to be shown YouTube videos. I mean, they had mentorship as well. Um, they had other things, but I basically, honestly, like I deconstructed all the parts of that and I created my own path off of that. So I was like, okay, they do mentorship. I need to find a mentor. They do all these YouTube videos. I need to go on YouTube. They do this other type of video. I forget where else there was like just other, resources that they were basically going to like go over every week on whatever. And I honestly wrote it all down and was like, I can do all of that. And then I canceled. So they didn't get any of my money. And I just put together that curriculum for myself. And on top of that, so it wasn't just me like being individual about it. Like I realized that there was such a community aspect to getting a job in user experience just based off of that course alone. And so I started going to webinars and really it was interesting timing too because of the shutdown. People weren't meeting in person anymore. Like people weren't going to their city UX whatever, like gatherings. It was now we have to be online. Now it's accessible to anyone because it's online. Like if it's, let's say it was a San Francisco based meetup. Now they're going to meet through Zoom, and now they say, okay, yeah, anybody, this is when it's happening. You can sign up and join us. So it was really interesting timing. So I literally I was going on to all these different kind of virtual meeting people, learning from people. People would present things, and I would learn about user experience. And one webinar I went to very early on, like within the first, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks of being in this, part of my journey, there was someone in the chat that said, "Hey, I'm doing a." He basically called it, instead of a boot camp, he was calling it an apprenticeship. And he was saying, if you feel like you've been learning already a bunch and you want to have a little bit more hands-on experience, sign up, reach out to me. And he like put his email. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds like exactly what I need. And that's, I think, I wish I remembered the exact timing, but I feel like I put my 2 weeks in like right before I saw that message. And I just feel like it was very synchronous of the timing. And so anyway, I met with him. It was great. Like we hit it off. We had similar ways of thinking about, like you can learn a lot just from the internet. And then he was like, I can just guide you more because I have experience and I can also like give you practical experience and we can put together your portfolio because it's something you have to apply to user experience jobs. And it was just like perfect timing because I really did do a lot of my own learning at that point with all the different YouTubes and whatever, all the things. And so I did that program. It was 3 months. And on top of that, I had another mentor because I knew I needed mentorship. And that was a free mentorship program through another, it's called UX Professionals Association. And they just had like a free mentorship situation. And I think that was 3 months too. And so I had another mentor, and he was really helpful too. He helped with my portfolio as well, and just helped me, like, again, understand the industry, and answer my questions was really kind of what our sessions were about. And just with all of that happening, I was able to really start to gain a network, which I think is one of the more important things that when you're like making that transition is, first definitely have the knowledge, like what is this field about, do all your learnings that you need to, but definitely also you need a community. You need people that have already done this and can help you when you have those questions, and when you start to feel like I don't know what the next move is, talk to these people, right? And so what was really nice about my mentor from UXPA was he was very connected because he had been in the industry for a long, long, long time. And he had told me about this other resource that was other people in the industry giving their time to be able to help people that are new, help them go through an interview, like an interview to just practice interviewing, right? And you could just sign up on this sheet, and with whoever, like, they had basically all the people's names and their bios, and you could say, I want to talk to this person. You set up a time. That was it, right? So I did that. And it's this, I just think, so interestingly, like every step was very synchronous of like, this person is the right person at this time. And so I talked to this woman who was a UX designer, and she was great. Like, she asked really helpful reflection questions for me, because I feel like I was in a really good spot where I was like, okay, I've learned a lot. I've done the practical work, which was helpful to be a part of that apprenticeship, to be able to work on websites, like actual websites, and work with small business owners basically on their websites, and go through the process in that way. And then now I don't know where to go next. And so talking to this woman, she was super helpful of what she was, basically asking reflective questions of, what do you want? What do you like about this? What do you not like about this? Okay, what industries are interesting to you? Because you could do user experience in pretty much any industry, because every industry at this point uses technology. And so you can really go a lot of different places. And so she was really helpful in that regard. And she also then helped me meet more people, because she said, she's like, I think you're ready for the next step. Just talking to you, you seem like you could start looking for jobs if you want. And I can connect you to basically the company she used to work for. It's called IDEO, but basically it's known for design, for user experience design, and just for design theory. Like, it's very, I guess, prestigious, maybe you can say, in the field. And they have a network that they keep. So they still keep up with each other, even if they don't work there anymore. And she said, if you want, I can share your story, your bio, what you're looking for in our group chat. And I said, oh, yes, absolutely. It's a great opportunity. And that's how I met another woman who, used to work with her. And we hit it off. And she actually still to this day is a mentor. I meet with her once a month. And she, we just, I don't know, we just really, when you kind of have that conversation with someone and you feel like you can keep talking, like, that's how we've been this whole time. And she was at the time working at Target, and she wasn't working in the UX department, but she worked in another kind of design type of department. But she, we had met maybe 3, 4 times, and then the fourth time or so, she was like, actually, there's a open role at Target for UX. And what's interesting is over this time I was starting to realize, because there's different specializations within UX, and you could go very much into the almost more visual design aspect of it. You could go more into the writing content part of it. You can go into more of the like systems thinking, architecture of a website way of going about it. You could go into research, which is understanding the human needs and goals and pain points, and then how we can fix some of the issues and create a website that would make sense for the people. And I was starting to realize I wanted to go into the research specialization of it around that time. And this is the job. The job that opened up at Target at that time was the first entry level UX research job at Target. And it was just like the perfect timing, right? Because I obviously would need entry level. This is my first time, full time UX research job. And yeah, so she basically referred me to the job, and I was able to go through the interview process, meet people on the team. It was a really good interview process, and I got the job. So that really was the transition from geology to, it kind of had a middle part of it being a little bit more like environmental science type of work, and then user experience research. So that was the transition.
Wow, amazing. Thank you, Saba.
Yeah.
That's very inspirational, as I said before. And I'm sure it's going to help so many people to see that it's possible. And thank you so much, because you gave so many tips and you explained how you did, like having a mentor, being connected with the networks, having people around you, surrounding yourself, knowing that you need a portfolio, that you need some experience. That's very helpful. And the last question will be, so now you are a user experience researcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the next move for you? How do you feel? How do you see yourself?
Yeah. So, it's been about 4 years doing UX research, and I'm currently at a healthcare company. So it's been different but similar work. And I think what's next is I do want to continue to do UX research. I think I'm still enjoying it. I maybe it's at a different company at any time, or maybe it's even maybe I go into a manager route. I have been mentoring people kind of throughout this time, and so I do enjoy kind of that mentorship aspect of being a manager, and so that might be what's next. But I also think that at some point I will own my own business and really do, just have a little bit more autonomy of what I want to do and work on. I haven't, put all the pieces together per se to tell you today that this is what the business will be, but I do think that that will be kind of in the future, in maybe a few years at this point.
Wow, amazing. So we wish you a lot of luck, a lot of the best for the next steps, and to keep yourself happy with what you're doing, and always pursue what you like. This is what you're doing, and it's very inspirational. Thank you, Saba. And for you guys who listened to this interview, I hope you had a great time with us. If yes, like the video and follow us for more.